amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
It really is.
I find it really amazing. And the other thing about that name, that 4-letter name, we call it the tetragrammaton, which comes from Greek, meaning 4 letters. And the other thing about it is that because it doesn't have the vowels underneath it, and we haven't spoken it for years and years, and that name was really only handed down from priest to priest, and there's no context within which to like figure out what the vowels are. We don't know how to pronounce it. So not only do we not pronounce it, we don't know how to, because we don't know how it would be expressed in terms of the vowels there. So it's very, I can get lost in the details. The Torah is so full of jewels for us to study. So, but let's move on. And, sorry, I do see someone. Is that Annalise?
Annalisa, hello, hi.
Annalisa, hi.
Hi, I am new. I'm dropping in from time to time as I can. I'm trying to learn Hebrew, so I figured this would be a good way to do it. And I am pretty familiar with like the Tanakh, so it should be fun for me. So hello.
But welcome.
Hi. So I actually come from a very heavily Christian background, and my grandmother had a question about exactly the tetragrammaton. So in the Christian Bible, it is typically spelled YHWH in English characters. And she had heard, because it's pronounced Yahweh, and she had heard that it was pronounced like that because it was the words in Hebrew for wind and breath. And I was like, I don't think that's right. No, okay. That was my question.
So wind would be ruach. Breath also, neshama is the way that we would say, or neshima would be breath. So those are different words. Yah is another name for God all by itself. So just the yud and the hey, and we do see that in the Torah as well. We'll see that from time to time, and we all know that word actually from the word hallelujah, praise God. Okay, so
yeah, okay,
yeah. So it's funny, these things that we know that we don't know we know, right? So yeah, and then as for the scholars, many scholars, and particularly Christian scholars and biblical scholars, do put the vowels in there, but they're a guess. They're really not for sure known. Now, the truth is, it probably is an ah vowel underneath this yud. But Jews really, for us, we don't ever try to pronounce it because we're not supposed to really. It's a mystical secret name. The other way that it's sometimes expressed with vowels is if you've ever seen Jehovah. That's another way to try and write out this word. So yeah. And I see, is that Susan? You're raising your hand? Hi, Susan.
Hi. I think what Annalisa's situation is, I've heard it before, but it's only because we can't pronounce the word, that it's like wind and breath, which exists, but they're not pronounced. We don't hear them as letters or vowels. So that's what I think, because I heard.
Yeah, it was like something like that. I'm like, yeah.
There's actually a Hasidic teaching that teaches exactly that. That's not what they mean, but if you were to pronounce them without vowels, that's what they would be expressed. So one idea is that we were talking about the priest going into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. What did he do in there? Perhaps he was just breathing, just being, also connecting to that root of Yud He Vav He that comes from that root to be. So maybe the priest went in there and meditated on Yom Kippur.
And breathing is life, and
Absolutely.
okay, it's life. So there are all sorts of ramifications with that.
Absolutely. I'm going to call on Pamela, and then I do want to try and move on so we can get to a little bit more text today.
Yeah.
You mean not just the one 4-letter word that we started with?
Yes.
I was actually going to make the point that was just made, or really a question around that, which is, could it be that sort of this somewhat, what I think of as a universal concept of is God as your life force energy, which is like the breath and their soul and the spirit and all of that. That's sort of, I think it's not literal, it's more metaphorical in that God is our life force, is our breath, is all of that. That's how I would.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a perfect comment to close that chapter for now, although literally we could spend an entire Torah study session just talking about the one name of God, and there are 72 of them in the Torah. So, all right, well, we'll continue a little bit. Is anyone willing to read for a little bit for us?
I will. Mickey, I will.
Great, Mickey, go ahead.
Do you want to start at speak to Israelite people?
If you could, yes, so this would, you would say,
yeah.
spoke. Yeah.
Adonai spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of God. 6 years you may now sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of Adonai. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. But you may eat whatever the land during its Sabbath will produce. You, your male and female slaves, the hired and bound laborers who live with you, and your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all its yield. You shall count off 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 weeks of years gives you a total of 49 years. Then you shall sound the horn loud in the 7th month on the 10th day of the month, the day of atonement. You shall have the horn sounded throughout your land. And you shall hallow the 50th year. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to your holding, and each of you shall return to your family.
Thank you so much for reading. So I want to just ask, is anyone on this Zoom, do we have any gardeners here?
I'm a gardener.
Great. So I'm just curious, for those of you who feel that connection to the land and produce, or perhaps flowers, whatever it is that you may have in your garden, how does this strike you, this idea of a rest for the land?
Great idea.
Yeah. Why? Yeah.
I think that we see that in history of the United States too, the letting fields lay quietly so the land can refresh itself.
Right, yeah.
But I'm going to tend to my trees every year, feed them and water them.
Oh, it's Cindy.
Yeah, I might change what I plant as far as vegetables, but my trees always need nurturing.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And I wonder, how this would be applied to trees, but I think it was a full sabbatical year that really everything was to be given a rest. Now, it does say if things produce on their own. I have lots of tomatoes that volunteer in my garden. So I think according to this, if those volunteered themselves, we would be allowed to partake of them. But I do think that this is really an expression of best practices for agricultural practices, and that we've seen that overuse of the land leads to barrenness in the land.
I think that's right, because if you, well, they always talk about rotating crops,
Right.
and the reason for that is so that the soil is replenished, because each crop uses a different element of the soil. So while it's using that, another's being replaced for the next that come along. And if you, I think the thought, if you left those fields fallow, in this instance, that in the cooler months that the plants would die, and rather than clean up, they also would ultimately replenish the soil, and the food supply would be tremendously increased over time.
Pamela.
So just a quick question, but does that mean like all your crops all over, or does that mean this particular plot of land is on this 7-year cycle, and then the next one will start the next year, and then the next year, because you have to feed everybody, right? So it seems to me that you would take, I don't know, this 1 acre and start it. This is year 1. This will be on year 2. This will be on year. Do you know how they did it?
Yeah, so it wasn't, what you're saying is like a great practice for us today, right? But it's not how it was done, and it's not how they still do this. They still have Jubilee years and sabbatical years in the land of Israel, and it is, everyone's on the same cycle. Now, what that means is that food would be stored ahead, but things like trees, of course, continue to produce, and then there are volunteer things. So it really is fascinating, and I think would be very, very hard to manage on a large scale in modern nation states. But this was for, like, you know, there were fewer people certainly at the time, and an easier group of people to handle to feed. But I wanted to get back, Mom, to what you were saying about the soil and the rest, and the different plants pulling different nutrients out of the soil and allowing the other nutrients to replenish in the soil as that was happening. And, you know, the word for this is that there's a Sabbath for the land.
Right.
So it's more than an agricultural practice. It is an agricultural practice, but it's more than that. It's also a spiritual practice. And so I think part of this is also to remind us how important rest and replenishment is for everything under the sun on our planet, for us, for Jewish, non-Jewish people, for animals, for even the soil. And so this is not just an expression of how do we take care of the land. It certainly is that, and it's incredibly important. And I think it runs much deeper and tells us that if the plants know how to do this and need to do this, we learn from the environment around us. And we learn by engaging in the holy act of enabling the plants to do the work that they need to do, and sitting back and observing the plants as they do that work, and thinking about how we are part of that system. And we benefit from it, but we also give to it to nurture it. So I think this is a beautiful teaching. And then there's the second part of it, beyond this sabbatical of 7 years, of this Jubilee in the 50th year, which is a very interesting concept and very foreign to us, because basically it prevented people. It prevented the kind of extreme situations that we have in many modern day countries, where people are able to amass great wealth, and there are people who have basically nothing, because every 50th year, debts were released. So it's a very different system than what we operate under. And I'll just say, I don't want to go too far into this, because this can bring up some really difficult feelings for people, because this is not a capitalist structure here. And it is a biblical way of looking at the world, but it's very different how many Americans look at the world. And so this can lead to some heated discussions, which I don't think we need to have today, because there's another piece that I do want to point it out and not pretend that it's not there.
I have a question for you about this. Earlier on, there was a mention of slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you head to this last part, you shall proclaim release throughout the land for all of its inhabitants. Does that mean that you let the slaves go?
Yeah. And there's a lot of scholarship on what that word eved, which could also be translated as worker, but often is translated slaves. When we read the Haggadah on Passover, we say avadim hayinu, we were slaves, workers. Okay. So it's the same word. But what exactly that meant in this society, there's a lot of scholarship and a lot of discussion about, some agreement and a lot of disagreement as to what it actually meant to be an Israelite slave. So there is information out there about it. I would definitely, it's something to follow up on and read up about, but there's some other stuff that I really want us to get to in our Torah portion, in our double Torah portion today. So I do see Susan is raising her hand, and then I'm going to take us to a different part of the Torah, and Cindy, and then I'll take us to a different part.
I wanted to ask a question. I had trouble hearing your mother speak, and she's not right at the microphone. So did it come down to the word eved as having multiple meanings, as a worker, servant? Is that what you're discussing?
That is what we're discussing. And my mom asked if this Jubilee year, if slaves were intended to be freed. And the answer is yes. They were given an option to be freed. They could also decide to maintain their status as part of a household. So, which also is really interesting, and I think opens up a lot of avenues for discussion there as well. Cindy.
My understanding for this section that the word release is also liberty, and that's what's on the Liberty Bell.
Sorry, Cindy, can you say that again? You're breaking.
Okay, for this section, another way I heard it is that the word release is also liberty, and that you shall proclaim liberty throughout the land is on the Liberty Bell.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. That is 100% true. That is 100% true. All right. Drawer is the word right here that you're talking about in Hebrew.
So is release right, or is it liberty?
Both.
Okay.
Yes, and. It means both in this context. Okay. But that's the word drawer in Hebrew, and it does mean both things. So we're going to move on. I want to move down to our next, because we have a double portion this week. Sorry, I'm going to stop sharing so I don't make people seasick while I find the next part that I want us to focus on. Okay, it comes up in the second portion of our double portion this week, which is called Bechukotai. Is there someone else who'd like to read in English for us? Oh, Doris,
mind.
I see you.
Doris going to do it?
Go ahead, Doris.
Want me to read?
Yes.
If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, I will grant you rains in their season, so that the earth shall yield its produce and the trees of the field their fruit. Your threshing shall overtake the vintage, and your vintage shall overtake the sowing. You shall eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land. I will grant peace in the land, and you shall lie down untroubled by anyone. I will give the land respite from vicious beasts, and no sword shall cross your land. Your army shall give chase to your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. 5 of you shall give chase to 100, and 100 of you shall give chase to 10,000. Your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. I will look with favor upon you and make you fertile and multiply you, and I will maintain my covenant with you.
Great. I want to stop there. We could go further, but I want to stop there for a minute. So we often talk about ourselves, the Jewish people, as a covenantal people. And I think we sometimes think about what that might mean for us, but sometimes we just use the word and don't really think about what does that covenant mean. So it's being spelled out for us here. And not only is it being spelled out, but it's being spelled out in a way that I think is very interesting for us as modern Jews to examine and have a discussion about. Is that?
Covenant is our covenant with God, right? The promise that started with Abraham.
Right. And it's being spelled out for us here,
Yeah.
Mickey, in Bechukotai. It says, if you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, here's what you're going to get. So a covenant is an agreement. It's a holy agreement. And in this Torah portion, we have this laying out of tit for tat.
Quid pro quo.
Quid pro quo. Thank you, Mickey. Fabulous. 100%. This is a quid pro quo with God. Because we're going to go on to read further. If you don't do this, there's some really unpleasant stuff that's coming your way. Now, I'm going to tell you, as a clergy person, I've seen some really, really wonderful, righteous people who have suffered. And I've seen people who get away with stuff.
Right.
And I think you all have. I don't think you need to be a clergy person to see that, right?
Right.
So this part of our text, these blessings are beautiful. The language is gorgeous. And it's theologically very problematic, and particularly problematic for Reform Jews. And so,
is there something generational about it, like sins of the father?
yeah, well, that'll come in the Haftarah, in the prophets. So I do think there are some responses that come in later Jewish texts that soften this sort of theology. But sometimes when natural disasters happen, you'll hear religious people who are fundamentalists, both Jewish and non-Jewish, who will look to this kind of a text and will utilize this kind of theology to say those people must have been doing something, must have been sinning, okay? And you'll hear that both from Jewish fundamentalists and non-Jewish fundamentalists. We don't use that kind of theology in reform settings. And I think, you know, we can think about what's great is in Judaism, we also have the book of Job. Okay, so Job was as righteous a person as they come. And yet Job what experienced, you know, such incredible tsuris. So we have both of those things in our tradition. And I think they temper each other. But I do think this is, I'm going to mute for a second.
She's young, this person. She's a cantor. That's not her, that's one of the people. I'll show you when she comes back.
Nikki, we hear you talking.
Oh, sorry, Cindy.
I'm so sorry, friends. I've got someone entering my house to fix our broken sink, and the dogs are going wild. So please excuse me.
Mom doesn't like this.
I apologize.
It's a new thing, so they don't hear
It's
me.
okay.
throw out, I know lots of people have hands raised, but I remember a bazillion years ago, Rabbi Leader, after a Yom Kippur service, like when we're talking like 25 years ago, was talked about how, you know, the is the Unitana Tokef, and how the repentance prayer, and I'm gonna misquote it, so I apologize for everybody on here who's
They're
better than I am, but
No, wait.
how they, some people interpreted it as saying that it will help you avoid the decree. And he was saying, he said they lessen, his view is that it lessens the severity of the decree. And I thought that was a nice way to bridge kind of what we're talking about here, which is to say, it doesn't mean bad things won't happen, but this will help you deal with the bad things that are inevitably will happen.
Yeah, Pamela, I think that's really a wonderful interpretation, and it often is translated as lessen the decree or temper the decree. And I think what you've added to it, and I guess Rabbi Leader as well, is that it's not necessarily even that those things will make God's actions toward you less severe. It's that those actions will engage you with the world and your community. And by doing so, you've created an ecosystem for yourself within which those things are tempered. We know that any sort of stressful situation, any difficult situation that we have to endure as human beings, when we have a community surrounding us to support us, to walk through that with, it's much more endurable. So I wanted us to focus on one section of this that I find particularly interesting, especially because we're a women's Torah study, which is verse 9 here. I'll look with favor upon you and make you fertile and multiply you, and I will maintain my covenant with you. So part of the covenant, as we know, is that God promised that Abraham's descendants would would be as numerous as stars. And so this part is really interesting to me and also really problematic. I'm sure we all know people who struggle with fertility or who have struggled with fertility. And now, thank goodness, we have the science and technology to help people with fertility struggles. We know that it is not a judgment upon someone's character if they're not able to have children of their own. But we also, I'm sure, are aware that it certainly was within our lifetimes, often seen as a character flaw when someone either wasn't able to or chose not to have children. And this, again, this is a part of the text that that supports that sort of thinking and can be interpreted in a way that can be very detrimental, I think, to and has been historically detrimental to women's mental health, et cetera. So I wondered if anyone had a response to this particular part of the text. No?
Well, I can just say, working in adoptions, that I know my clients who were Orthodox, the comments I heard that their rabbis made to them were just horrible. You know, like, maybe one of your mezuzahs in your house is wrong, or maybe you didn't do this, and they would really blame the couple. And it was just horrible, you know, that they just didn't worry about science or what their issues were, that they would blame them religiously for the infertility.
It's really heartbreaking to hear, Cindy, and I'm glad that those people had you to help them, you know, find children to bring into their lives and surround them with the love that they deserved, and to receive the blessings that they could have from having children in their lives.
Can I just get back to my question? Hopefully it'll be quick. All of these rules for agriculture and trees and sowing, they're wandering the desert at this point. Were the rules for also apply for in the desert, or for just once they reached Canaan?
Well, this is Leviticus, so they're already in the land.
Okay.
Yeah, they're already ba'aretz. So these are rules for living ba'aretz, for living on the land, in the land. Yeah. Which makes sense, because in the desert, this would be very difficult to, a lot of these would be very difficult to have. They wouldn't really make sense. So really good point there. You know, I think the other thing to think about in terms of this particular text, for me at least, is that this idea of, you know, making you fertile and multiply, at the time that this was written and applied, fertility problems were consistently laid at the feet of women. And that's until incredibly recently that science and technology helped us to understand that men played a role within fertility as well. And, you know, I hope that within our community, that this becomes less and less taboo. You know, as we look at this text, which connects these ideas of taking care of the land and this idea of producing children. And, you know, I have children who are young adults, and the two of them have very different ideas about bringing kids into the world. But I talk to young people today, a lot of young people today who have a lot of reticence about having their own children, about creating children, with the ecological state of affairs in our world and what they see coming in the next years. Mickey, are you raising your hand?
Yes, I do want to respond to Cindy. Oh, I lost the thing. To offer a contrary view in terms of orthodoxy. This was not a great rabbi then who made them feel badly. I know in my immediate family, I have an Orthodox sister, and it was adopted, and it was beautiful. And I know that she knows of people, there are others in her community that adopt because they're bringing the child.
Yeah, I never said adoption was bad or the rabbis made them feel bad. The rabbis would blame their infertility on them doing something wrong, but they would support adoption as long as you converted the child.
Yes, converting, I get that, but also infertility, the blame is, I think, is lessening. I mean, it's like what you might do and not do. And Cantor, your argument I had, I mean, there's a view of your adult child. I heard 50 years ago when I had a discussion with a friend, that's when, it doesn't want more people on the earth, you know, we're using up the air, we're polluting. And then at the same time, I listened to a family member who was a Holocaust survivor and said, oh, we need Jewish people, we need more of us, we need to have children. So those two views, I think, were operative, both diametrically opposed. And my friend who didn't want to have more, she had one child, is now alone in the world. So, you know, it's on a personal level, but it's just not that, she wasn't contributing to the ongoing of the community then, a Jewish community.
Mickey, did you want to say something? I think you need to unmute yourself. We can't hear you, Mickey, we can't hear you.
Okay, now can you?
Yeah, we got you.
Oh, goody. Well, I was thinking that Sarah wasn't very fertile, you know, to go back to our own history, that Sarah wasn't fertile. Right. And she certainly was very old by the time she finally conceived. And also that the Jewish people are not a large number of people in the world. And my parents were Holocaust survivors, and my brother and I, according to my mother, were both accidents because after what they had seen and been through, it was their decision not to have children. And, you know, they bought a baby grand, and their life was going to be about music that they would make together. So it doesn't, you know, that it seems that promise that we were going to be a large people has never really worked out in the world. Thank you so much.
Mickey, thank you. I'm sorry, we got barky
No,
dog.
don't, yeah.
Thank you so much. I have chills listening to that. Really, really powerful. It is definitely, there's definitely a dichotomy there, right?
Yeah.
Both of these things exist at the same time. And it's not easy answers to these,
No.
to these questions. And, you know, that's the beautiful thing about studying this text called the Torah, that we look back thousands of years and see these questions that were difficult for our ancestors in antiquity are still the same things that we're grappling with now. And we're told in Proverbs to turn it and turn it again, for everything is found within it. And I know for me, whenever I have the opportunity to sit with wonderful people like you and study this text, I find again and again that that is that that is the truth. Susan, did you have something you wanted to share?
I think there's a Jewish response to that, and the Jewish response should be a positive one to increase the community. It's in there in the later scriptures. I mean, in the Mishnah too. So you take a more optimistic view that maybe if you have more children and you raise them, hopefully in Jewish tradition, that they will want to increase and perfect the world, do a tikkun olam. So I think there is an answer. It's just whether you want to follow it or not.
Yeah. Susan, I think that that's an answer. And I think also, especially sitting with Cindy on this call, who has, had such a wonderful, amazing career in helping people welcome children who need to be adopted into their home families, that there are a multitude of ways of living Jewishly, and creating Jewish family systems. And for some people, and for me, certainly, I feel incredibly blessed to have just a beautiful family life with two wonderful children. And for some people, that's the right answer. And for other people, maybe it's adopting. And I also know members of our community who made the choice not to have children and are living beautiful and fulfilling Jewish lives. So I feel that that really there are just so many different ways to live a full and meaningful Jewish life. And Susan, yes, our texts do prescribe, there is a preferred way to do that. That is described within our texts. From where I sit as someone who is often in the seat of counseling people, I want to be as open as possible to all the different wonderful ways that people live their lives Jewishly. Doris.
Yeah, haven't we always been told to go forth and multiply? Isn't that one of the sermons we hear all the time? So I think that it was incumbent upon us to reproduce and build our families and our community.
It absolutely is part of the biblical injunction. No question about it. It's a mitzvah, right? And a mitzvah doesn't just mean a good deed. It's commanded. So that is in there. And we live in a world where that is not possible for everybody, or desirable for everybody. And so I sit with two hats on, one that really wants to uphold and honor everything that is beautiful about our tradition, and also not create a Judaism that excludes people who choose different paths, or that path is not available to them. So Pamela.
So I just wanted to invoke Panim's words, although probably not what she would say, which is we have to look at the context in which this was written. Everyone who can remember that she always says that. So what I was thinking is that in an agrarian society, which we were in the world and still are in some parts of the world, but at least until 100, 150 years ago, we needed lots of people. And so if we were going to farm and have the fertility in the land and the agriculture, then we needed a lot of people to farm that land and have the agriculture. So, I think that, yes, it's great to be fruitful, but it's also important to remember that, for example, if we were Jews living in China, which just for a moment assume that could be possible, where you have 1 billion people and so many people being fruitful and multiplying does not necessarily promote longevity, because you didn't necessarily have the wherewithal or the ability to support such a large population. So I think that what it means to be fruitful doesn't necessarily have to mean have lots of children, if we look at it in the context of today versus the context of an agrarian world. Probably not very Judaic, but that's my own little interpretation of it.
I love that. I love that, Pamela. Thank you for sharing. I think, you know, what you point out is really interesting. And then I'll be my own devil's advocate to say that we do live in a world right now where we Jews are such an incredible minority, such an incredible minority. And perhaps if there were more of us, there might be less anti-Semitism, because we know that hate is often based on fear of the unknown. And so if we were a much larger part of society, perhaps more people would be familiar with Judaism and find it less likely to hate. Who knows? Merle.
I think too, I mean, what you just said makes a lot of sense. There need to be more of us, but I think there need to be more of us that are willing to speak out against I mean, unfortunately, my husband has a lot of clients who don't know or understand Judaism. And he himself, because he doesn't want to lose these clients, keeps his mouth shut. But I think that if we are more vocal about it, then I think there might be in the future, not right now, less issues. Maybe.
But it goes so far back. It goes way. I mean, it's not like
no question
current.
about it.
It's ancient. It goes back. Look at, I saw last week in the paper, students was at Santa Cruz was celebrating Hitler's birthday. Did you see that?
No.
I mean, I was sick about that. That's a state school. How could they dare to do that and allow something like that?
There used to be a hotel in Las Vegas where the owner celebrated everything about Hitler. So, I mean, it's awful. We're stuck with it, but I think that we have it as hard as it is. I think we have to be. I mean, my grandchildren have it with dance and karate. Karate totally understands that the girls won't be there or the kids won't be there because of Jewish holidays. Scottsdale schools, like 2 years ago, maybe 3, started closing on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
Great.
But most of the people don't know why. Yeah. And they object to it. Oh my God, my kids are missing 3 days of school. Well, our kids are missing 2 weeks of school here, a week here, whatever. But they don't get the reasons as to why. And the school district doesn't say why they're doing it, or that we're supporting the Jewish community that are part of our schools, or the board of rabbis has insisted that we do this. Yeah. But I think that part of it is that we're not, and I think even hundreds of thousands, whatever it was years ago, we're not vocal enough about it. And that's out of fear more than anything else.
And I think that fear is certainly a valid fear. And I agree with you 100%. And I think this is a perfect note for us to end on, because unfortunately I have a 1 o'clock. Honestly, I could spend all day with you women. Each and every one of you is fantastic. I'll tell Susan I'm happy to step in for her anytime. Although we're
happy to have you.
I'm sure you missed her as well.
Where did she go? Is she sick, or she just took the day off, or what?
She's just not available, so she asked me to step in. Yeah.
We're happy to have you.
Thank you, Doris. So I think what a wonderful note for us to end on, the idea of us each leaving today's Torah study with pride in our religion, in our heritage, in our culture, in our faith. I certainly am proud to be associated with all of you. So thank you so much for a lovely, lovely lunch hour. And I look forward to seeing you all again, either on Zoom or in person.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you Friday night.
Thank you.
Friday night.
Friday night's a
is baby
Friday night's
naming.
I'll
Friday
be
night's a
there
big,
on Zoom Friday night or whatever.
Friday night's a big
Facebook.
night for
Friday
me.
night at the synagogue, baby naming for Noah Ruvelson.
Thank you, Vicky.
Fabulous. That's exciting.
I'm so
Congratulations.
excited.
My
Mazel
beautiful
tov.
grandson is getting his name on Friday night. Yeah.
Speaking of
Thank
Pru
you.
Speaking of Pru or Vu, be fruitful and multiply. Congratulations, Doris.
Right.
Will you be there Friday night, Kareth? Are you coming?
With bells on.
Oh, good.
Oh, yay.
We're very excited. Thank you. Thank you, Mickey,
Mazel
for the
tov.
plug. Mickey is my agent. She.
Oh, that's fabulous. Thank you, Mickey.
So
Thank you.
proud of them.
Doris.
Have a wonderful week, everyone.
You
Thank
too.
you so
Bye-bye,
much.
everybody. Happy weekend. Happy Mother's Day.
You too, Doris.